Welcome back to my channel, Star Booze.
Others claim that if you are a millionaire, you have told one of the world's youngest. If I can include an insightful query, are you truly millionaires? George Harrison had a reputation as the silent Beatle. However, when Yoko Ono walked into their planet, he was the first to speak. He cautioned John. He went straight up to her. He observed's end before anybody else does. Something happened during the Let It Be sessions. Broke inside him at last. Following lunch on the 10th of January 1969, he uttered 5 sentences and walked away. That brief farewell meant everything. George was aware that the Beatles were completed, and he was certain of who had contributed to their destruction. George Harrison was born in a small town on February 25, 1943, residence in Waverley's 12, Arnold Grove, Liverpool. There was just one cold in the home. Fire to combat the bitter cold, and the loo was outside. That was typical for families in the working class at the time. However, it made things difficult. Liverpool itself still had wounds from World War II. Explosions. Individuals such as the Harrisons must endure rations through 1954. Food, fuel, and clothing were valuable. Georgia grew up in these difficult circumstances. However, rather of infuriating it gave he remained strong and humble. With him indefinitely. Even after he became into one of the world's most well-known men, his Louise, the mother, offered something out of the ordinary. Back to that modest upbringing. During pregnancy, she developed a fascination with George Booker's Indian customs. She switched on the radio. India, taking in the unusual and stunning sitar and tabla sounds. In a city like Liverpool, this was uncommon, where Western music was the most popular without being aware of it. Louise handed Georgie a preview of something that will influence his future. Long before he ever met traveling to India or seeing Ravi Shankar already, George had been moved by the Eastern music and spirit. His seed was sown by the mother's curiosity, that developed into his enduring passion for Indian meditation and philosophy. As soon as George was around the age of 12 or 13, anything changed. On a casual bike ride, while riding his bike, he heard Elvis outside the home of a neighbor. The song Heartbreak Hotel by Presley through a window that is open. The noise struck like lightning to him. Feelings of rock and roll willed and brimming with potential. In that point, music ceased to be merely anything in the distance. George saw a path out of poverty all of a sudden, that the music gave him hope for a better life, one full of adventure and guitars. The spark was what put him on the path to become a performer. School ceased to be of great interest to him. He had trouble at the Liverpool Institute and struggled in his academic career. However, even though his professors could have noticed that failure, George was occupied with his studies. Something more significant, he heard himself into Carl Perkins' songs, both Buddy Holly and Little Richard. He was attracted to the rockabilly twang of Perkins, the frenzied energy of Little Richard, and Buddy Holly's ingenious guitar playing. As other children committed facts to memory, George was discovering how to use 6 to create magic strings. He was not held back by his low grades. Back they shoved him ahead. By the age of 14, he accumulated sufficient funds to purchase his first Zenith acoustic guitar. He instructed Lane by listening to recordings. Repeatedly, repeating what he had heard. Hellicked expensive tutors and lessons. Rather, he was determined. He performed. Learning chords till his fingers are seed in fashions that would support him in the future. Alter the course of music history. That teenager, his commitment not only made him a fantastic musician, he became unafraid of experimenting with new sounds, such as the sitar, that no other person in the rock was touching. At 14, something else happened that changed my life. Paul McCartney was met at the Liverpoolist Deblichtum. Paul was 15 years old. They turned into friends by virtue of their mutual appreciation of their new music that is defiant and coming from America. George remained silent and concentrated on the guitar. Paul was gifted and full of concepts. They shared a dream of a distinct future. In less than a year, Paul presented John Lennon to George, and that straightforward connection served as the foundation of something that would alter the world. George became a member of the at age 15. Quarrymen took over as lead guitarist. Years old, it was John Lennon's band. Invention. But George added new abilities. Vitality. John was amazed when he performed Theranchi, a cunning instrumentalist, during an omnibus tryout. Although George was more youthful than the others, and his ability compensed for it, his arrival influenced the sound of the band and placed them on the route that would make them the Beatles. In Hamburg, the true test was conducted. Germany from 1960 to 1962, the group played for hours every night, occasionally up to 8 continuous hours in harsh clubs crowded with boisterous people. They resided in little chambers behind the stage without windows. They hardly had enough money for food. Though the experience was harsh, it made them all powerful. They acquired the skills to operate and became closer as a band. By the pond returning to Liverpool, we were prepared for anything. In 1962, they made a decision that stunned supporters. Pete, their drummer, Best, was fired. The making the choice wasn't simple, but the group felt he was not a perfect fit. They introduced Ringo Starr, who ignited a fresh passion for their tunes. Ringo playing drums, though the iconic Fab Four was finished, and alas there was a puzzle piece in place. And in February 9, 1964, an event occurred. America would never forget it. The Beatles entered the stage of the Ed Sullivan Show, and at that very moment Dale turned everything. Paul Lennon, John George Harrison, Ringo and McCartney, these four young men weren't the only ones from no longer Liverpool. They turned into myths. 3 million people watched that night. Them that accounted for over 60% of all TVs. Turned on to see them in America. It was the nation's largest television event that ever seen before then. CBS was airing with 50,000 demands for tickets. Despite even though there were only 728 seats available, people were eager to participate in. 5 songs were performed by the Beatles. I Want to Hold Your Hand. When they performed Hand, the audience erupted. Even the Vice President Richard's daughter Nixon was in the studio. The nation was still devastated following the passing of President Kennedy within months previously. Joy was delivered by the Beatles. They gave hope. That evening wasn't simply regarding music. It marked the beginning of something fresh. Beatle frenzy spread throughout nation. The invasion by the British had started on the 4th of April 1964. The Beatles, something that had never been done before. They were among the top 5 on simultaneously on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Time. Can't Buy Me Love came in first. Twist and Shout came in second. The number She Loves You was number 3. The 4th was Seed Like to Take Your Hand. The 5th was Please Please Me. That year 34 out of 34 Beatles songs were featured on 100 Hot. Number 1 was reached by 6 of them. They were more than just the top singles. Diagram. Meet the Beatles is one of their albums. Additionally, the Beatles were initially introduced as well as number 2 on the album chart. For half of the top 10 songs in America in a single week here, There's Nobody was even close to about 60 years. Additionally, when someone in 2021, it eventually tied the record, and it was in the age of streaming. The Beatles had completed it using records. Individuals went out and purchased. They weren't, as that week demonstrated, just well liked. They were unstoppable. Quiet One. George Harrison discovered his voice in 1963. While ill in a hotel he scrolled, Don't, in his Bournemouth room. I'm bothered. He described it as being quite terrible. Song. But to him it was everything. It demonstrated his writing ability. It was made by the song. Moving on to the UK with the Beatles, and in the US, Meet the Beatles. It sounded distinct from McCartney's and Lennon's tunes, moodier and darker. It was a toony step, but it provided George with their bravery to continue writing. One day Hugh would contribute to the world. And My Guitar Is Softly Crying, but being it wasn't easy for him in the Beatles. His songs were consistently ignored. The majority of there were just 2 or 3 Harrison albums. Tracks he had by the late 1960s. She wrote so much that he demonstrated to the producer. In fact, Phil Spector has hundreds of tins. All Things Must and other classics. Isn't it a shame that you didn't make it? Pasanto Records by the Beatles. He was stuck. He stated that he was awaiting his songs to bait was similar to constipation. With Ethy sessions of Let It Be, it became too a lot. He left. Upon his return, it was different. His album from 1970, All Things Must Pass, which at last displayed thought he had been holding inside for so long. Lengthy. There was more than just George's music, something that made him unique. In 1965, however, filmmaking assistants, it was the sitar he heard first. He found it fascinating. He purchased one and blupped it to timber from Norway. That tuned everything. It was the initial when did the sitar first debut in Western pop music. It had a fresh, enigmatic sound. Other bands imitated it. You soon heard sitars. Within Rolling Stones tracks, The Donovan and Birds. George's inexpensive sitar from Oxford Street rose to fame. In 2024, it brought over more than $53,000. The door had been opened by the SATAR. To another musical realm. Getting to know Ravi Shankar transformed George's life in 1966 even more. Rockstar George came from Liverpool. One well-respected Indian was Ravi. Master. Their worlds were different. Then the scandal broke out. The Maharishi who instructed them was charged with advancing the status of women at the ashram. Lennon was enraged. He composed What Have You Done? Asked Maharishi. They left India wounded and furious. Lennon changed the song's name to Sexy Sortie. George sensed he continued to support meditation. But was let down. The journey was altered the band indefinitely. Following India, George entered Krishna's mind more deeply. Every day he chanted Hare Krishna. He helped spread awareness of the chant. He created the Hare Krishna mantra in 1969 and in the UK. It peaked at number 12. His hit was a prayer. My dear Lord, he provided millions to the movement for Krishna. George the Calm had always seemed to Harrison the Beatles one. In 1968, however, he made an audacious action that transformed everything. He composed the song While My Guitar Weeps Softly. He had the idea after examining the eking. He was depressed about the tension and absence of affection in the world within the Beatles. He thought nobody listened to his tunes with interest. Thus, he say me things startling. He asked Eric to come, Clapton, a celebrity and close Buddha-led guitarist, to perform on that track. The Beatles hardly ever allow their records are played by strangers. However, Clapton's presence this time made John finally, Lennon and Paul McCartney, to tension. The mood in the studio shift. The September recording of the song 1968 turned into a masterpiece. Clapton Horizon's melancholic lyrics and the solemn it into a Beatles song, Best Tunes. It demonstrated to the world that Harrison had Lennon's level of talent, as well as McCartney. However, items within the van continued to disintegrate. January, the Let It Be event on the 10th of 1969 sessions. Harrison's maximum was reached. Following a rehearsal-filled morning, AHF had enough of Twickenham Studios. Paul's domineering behavior, John's detachment, and the ongoing presence of Yoko Ono pushed him to the limit. Following lunch, he got into a furious dispute. Then Hegged up and said, "Catch up with you around their clubs." Then he left. The Beatles set empted to continue without him. They even made a joke about inviting Eric Clapton to take his position, although it was obvious the band was experiencing a crisis. The studio turned into out location that afternoon. The Yokos singing while they jammed aimlessly. If the Beatles didn't seem to be the Beatles, Harrison went that same day. Wawa was written at home. The heading was Armark about his bandmates had a chess applying him. The song attacked the phony he felt stuck between worry and smiles. It was his method of declaring that he was finished with absurdity. He recorded it for All Things Must Pass in his solo album. It was the first track he laid in 1970. Down. It was a massive recording. It had members of Bad, Ringo Starr and Clapton Finger, followed by a loud noise that was drowned out the Beatles' recollections. That his independence and rage were encapsulated in the song. Harrison never rejoined the Beatles. Without imposing any demands, he informed them Twickenham had to let them go and record at the Apple Studios. He wanted to stop talking of live performances, and he desired a fresh, more unhurried manner of labor. The band concurred. His circumstances allowed them to complete Let It Be, and even have a last performance together, the well-known rooftop performance. However, everyone could see the fissures. The Beatles mightily proceed if they adhered to Harrison's phrases. Later that year, Harrison at last received the honor he was due. His tune Something Turned became the first Harrison, excluding single. It shared a document with Come Together on the Abbey Road by Lennon, an album motivated by his spouse, Pattie Boyd. There was something lovely and pure. Frank, it was dubbed the best love song by Sinatra. Of the previous half-century, critics and admirers concurred. Harrison had demonstrated his belonging. Next to Lennon at the upper right corner, and McCartney, but hostilities continued to escalate. Harrison had been truthful from the beginning. Concerning Yoko Ono, he informed her that she had unnegatively regarded in New York, and that she radiated negativity. Later, John Lennon acknowledged that Harrison had told her the truth. Face Harrison had not been mean. He was expressing what many people believed but didn't have the courage to speak. The Beatles were broken by Yoko. Largest rule: no wives or girlfriends. In the studio, she took a seat beside John. As they worked, they whispered to him. Paul attempted to keep the conversation light by it's a joke. However, Harrison sensed it. Deeper. She had altered their space, their connection. A single brief moment, everything. While on Abbey Road sessions, Yoko grabbed a cookie from Harrison's cabinet of speakers. He blew up. "That jerk," he shouted. Everybody froze. It has nothing to do with the biscuit. It was regarding decency, limits, and how much it evolved. Harrison resembled Yoko's last straw was presence. When heck with the band on that January 1969 day. In his journal, he wrote, "LFT the beat." It was straightforward, but it stated everything. He had lost his favorite band, the close-knit bunch of Liverpool boys, to exist. The Beatles were completed as they were in the past. Harrison could see it plainly, despite the others were unwilling to confront it just yet. What followed was just devastating. George Harrison had been waiting for years, silently, as the world concentrated on songs by Lennon and McCartney. Now that he and the rest had left the Beatles, hurried to distribute songs that had been confined. George's tunes and people were very amazed. Finally, Fanslet, how much he had been suppressing his gift, formerly concealed in the background, poured forth. To assist George helped him create his new music by bringing in Phil Spector. Spector gained notoriety because of Sonic Wall and a multi-layered, complex manner of recording that occupied all available space. With tunes, they collaborated on George's All Things Must, his solo album Go Ahead. Spector transformed George's ordinary demos into large-scale, impactful songs, they booming choruses and additional strings drums. The album included celebrities such as Finger members and Eric Clapton. When songs like My Sweet were played, George was known to Lord and What Is Life. Was no longer only the silent Beatle. He had discovered who he really was. When every November, Things Must Pass was released, it was a triple album released in 1970, one of the first of its type. It featured over 20 tunes. The music was heartfelt, rich, and very spiritual. Critics stated that was superior to a lot of the Beatles had carried out in their last years. The record showed to everyone that George was a brilliant in his own right. It's still on among the best solo compositions by any Beatles. My Sweet Lord became quite popular. It was the Beatles' debut solo song in 1970. It became the #1 song in America. but there were problems with its success. The publisher of the popular song He's So from 1963, George, was sued by Fine, who claimed that he had duplicated their tune. Following years in court, the George, according to the judge, duplicated it without meaning to. George made a payment in 1981. The situation worsened during a dinner celebration. Before everyone, George spoke, "You know I'm in love, Ringo, with your wife." There was silence in the room. After running, Moran locked herself in Theristrup. Heartbroken, Ringo could only bet, "You than someone we don't know." Later, John Lennon described it as nesta. That is the extent of the betrayal. Felt. The Beatles' brotherhood had broken. On the eve of the year 1974, George expressed his desire for a divorce to Patty. An agonizing year came to a tragic end. Patty and Ronnie were already dating, but it was painful how George finished it profoundly in 1977. The divorce was finalized. The life of George Harrison following the Beatles was an adventure full of dangers, heartache, victories, and classic. He attempted to turn his aspire to assist up-and-coming musicians in establishing Dark Horse Records. He wished to support musicians such as Ravi Splinter and Shankar were in charge of his own compositions. However, it wasn't simple. The label's first agreement with NM Records ended separate. Harrison's absence from a crucial album deadline due to hepatitis. NM filed a lawsuit, broke connections, and paid him $10 million. This was a major setback that had already cost $3 million on the artists of Darker, but only the song Cost a Fine Town by Splinter became a slight hit. Harrison had to give back a $1 million advance and hastily signed with Warner Bros. Right before his 1-2-3 in album 33. What began as an optimistic endeavor to assist people turned into Dinto, a challenging music lesson company in 1978. Harrison displayed throughout his bravery and kindness. The Monty Python's life was about to be terminated after EMI Films withdrew at the final second. Harrison prevented thought take place. He put his beloved up for mortgage. To generate $3 million. Friar Park will host Abigail making handmade films. His sole justification, he made a joke about how much he wanted to watch the film. The gamble paid well. The life of in the US, Brian made $21 million by itself. Handmade films continued to provide some of Britain's most cherished cult films such as With Nail and Time, Bandits and Harrison's confidence boost was beneficial, preserved British filmmaking during a period when it was having trouble. His private life was sacrilege dramatic. Harrison wed Patty Boyd in 1966 following a difficult encounter with her day or night, yet their connection broke under the strain of celebrity, his spiritual pursuits and infidelity. Eric Clapton, a dear friend, fell committed to Boyd, writing Leela about how much he wanted her. As soon as Boyd eventually departed Harrison in 1977 and 1979 marriage to Clapton, it might have ruined their friendship. Rather, Harrison participated at their nuptials and even jokingly claimed to be their husband-in-law. Boyd became the inspiration. 4 songs including As Something by Harrison and Leela by Clapton and Fantastic Tonight, the letters that they sold for more than $3.6 million after she wrote to her in 2024, demonstrating the extent of their people are still captivated by the narrative. Over the years, Harrison found it difficult to equal the accomplishments of his previous band members. His mid-1970s albums didn't sell well or win over critics. He was perceived as the silent bug that didn't longer fit in. Illness and fatigue left his voice behind during his 1974 tour. Dark Horse's album was a rush. Was not well welcomed. Harrison withdrew to the spotlight and concentrated on movies and private endeavors. It wasn't up to the Wilburys' journey, in that he really gained his footing in the late 1980s. Once more, Harrison's voice has never quite recovered. Years of stress and smoking hurt his throat. His tours in 1974 was particularly excruciating. He had laryngitis, he was having trouble singing, and his detractors were. The years spent on stage took a toll and he received a diagnosis of carcinoma of the throat. He initially defeated it, but in 2001, lung cancer spread to his brain. Despite his declining health, Harrison remained upbeat. He shared his "I'm not going to die on you people," admirers said. Not yet. I am quite fortunate. The return what he accomplished in 1987 with Cloud 9 was it's simply incredible. After several years from the charts, Harrison came back with a #1 hit and platinum sales. Got My Mind Set on You in the US. That song, a rendition of an R&B song from 1962, brought him back into contact with a new generation. His partnership with Jeff Lynne resulted in Cloud 9 is new and interesting, demonstrating Harrison might still be able to compete on MTV. Period. When he started using music videos, We Was Fab turned into a light-hearted sentimental smash. Plenty with allusions to the Beatles. In 1988, Harrison was a founding member of the Traveling Wilburys alongside Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Jeff Lynne. It began handled with care as a single song that was simply too good to throw away. 10 days from now, they made a whole album that turned out to be a great success. The blend of the group of skill and camaraderie established it something enchanted, despite its duration, just a little while. During it all, Harrison adhered to his religious convictions. He did yoga, meditation, and Dan started eating vegetarianism in 1968, until he passed away. He frequently discussed his Sikh God and viewed all faiths as a portion of the same reality. In spite of Thefham, he remained committed to peace, but it was broken. On December 30, 1999, a guy by the name of Michael Harrison's house was broken into by Abram and stabbed him more than 40 times. Harrison's lung failed, and he was almost demise. Olivia, his wife, resisted the assailant holding a candle and even Caesar toe hold him his testicles. Police came right on schedule. Harrison thereafter claimed to have felt his life evaporating. Ash was bleeding as he laid. According to doctors, it's a miracle he lived. The assault departed scars more profound than the injuries. Eric Harrison, according to Clapton, was never theism. The trauma caused him to withdraw, appeared to disturb the peace he had worked to create, quite difficult to locate. Shortly thereafter the cancer came back. Keith Richards thought Harrison was weakened by the strike so much that he was unable to repel. Harrison died, on age 58, on November 29, 2001, with his family by his side. Listening, he departed the world to sitar music and tranquilly. His ashes were dispersed throughout the Ganges River like he had desired. His last message was straightforward and accurate. Life is as delicate as a drop of rain on a lotus leaf.